Okay, so I think we'll just start right back up where we left off yesterday, because I said we've got quite a few verses to go through. In some of the other courses I've done, we've had auxiliary subjects, so tangential subjects, but in here, because there's quite a few verses, we'll just go right through them, I think. And if questions come up, also you can let me know during the teaching if anything comes up. Otherwise, at the end of the time, also we can do. So we left off here yesterday. This was arguing with the Samkhya's about who believe that the knower is a non-material mind that's distinct from the material world, which includes everything other than awareness. But now we move on to the Vaisheshika, another important Indian school. So the main difference here is that for them, the mind is matter. It's a physical thing. So then what's being negated here then is that a physical thing could be a knower. So because this is in some sense a material position. They're materialists in the sense that they consider everything that exists to have some kind of material correlate. But they're not like modern materialists, the Vaisheshika, because they do believe in reincarnation and karma. They just simply believe that it's a physical process. But in any case, here, Shantideva is negating them for saying that a physical thing, which is not a mind, could know anything. So non-knowing is also not the self. It doesn't know, like pots and such. So why does one thing have awareness and one thing doesn't? That's actually also a major question today. A lot of people ask, why does one particular configuration of particles supposedly in the brain lead to awareness? Is there some kind of special formula? So far, nobody's come up with anything, except that there are theories about it. One being that, well, yes, something about the complexity of the particles in the brain, because it is actually clear that the brain seems to be the most complex natural phenomenon in the universe. But that doesn't exactly explain anything. It's okay, it's so complex, but why does that give rise to awareness? And then secondly, some people argue that there is no such thing as giving rise to awareness. There is no such thing as awareness. It's not a real phenomenon where we talk. It's just something that we mentally impute based on processes in the brain. But this is definitely a bit problematic, because to say that, well, what exactly are they saying is being imputed? Is it the fact is that there's some kind of self? Because Buddhists would agree that there's not a particular self that's separate from all of the different parts, or are they saying the actual aspect of being aware? This is something that we experience. We experience being aware, and what is that experience? What does it mean to have experience? So to just basically deny that and say that there's no such thing as experience because it doesn't fit into our paradigm of materialism. And it can't function according to the laws of physics. That's one position, but then it really is quite contrary to, for lack of a better word, quite contrary to our experience. So that, as I say, is the major argument today, and this is an argument that they were having in India as well. So why should one thing know, and what, like a brain, and one thing like a pot not know? So then if they argue, well, or because it has a mind, it knows. So if you say, well, it's not that the self is a physical thing, but it has a special quality of mind, which is different than a pot. Well, then non-knowing breaks to bits. Your theory that there is no knower, that it's merely material, doesn't work, because now you've posited there is some kind of knower. If you say self's unchangeable, then what can mind cause it to do? So likewise, if your self is an unchangeable physical thing, then how can it interact with a non-material mind? Because an unchanging thing can't interact with anything. It would change in the process of interaction. it would be mindless, actionless. You might as well say space is self. So in that case, if yourself is this unchanging thing, then it has no mind, it has no action. So it's just the same as saying space is the self. So now we finished negating the self and self of persons in this section. And now Shantideva responds to potential objections to this argument that there's no self of person. Somebody raises the qualm. Without a self, a link from deeds to outcomes is inviable. So this is a very good objection, actually. If there's no self, then how can I say I did this and I experienced this? So particularly they're talking about karma. If I say I did this action in this life and I experienced it in the next life, if there's no self, who is it that's doing it and experiencing it? How can it be the same person? Or even in this life, why should it matter to me what happens in 20 years to me? Because there's no continuing self that's still there. So when karma's done, if it decays, then who's there to experience it, right? So if the action is finished and then it just disappears, then who is there at the time of the experience? That's the unchanging. There's no unchanging person, so there's no continuity of self. The base of actions and results is different. No self holds sway. When both of us agree on that, is not this quarrel meaningless? So we both agree that the person who does the action and the person who experiences the result are different. We both agree that if I do an action in this life and then in the next life I experience the result, those are different people. And likewise, if I do an action today and I experience the result in 20 years, it's a very different person that's experiencing it. So both of us agree that that's the case. So why are we fighting about it? There's no thing seen that has the cause and has at that time the result. So at the time of creating the cause, one doesn't experience the result. There is no there's no single person on single sort of unified person who's both doing the cause and experiencing the result. But based on one continuum, we say he sows and then he reaps. So although there is not one particular unchanging person who does one thing and then experiences the result, still because it's the same continuum, and we can talk about the person who does the action and the experiencer being the same person conventionally. The past and future minds are not the self because they don't exist. So again, it's coming into, if you talk about some kind of unchanging self, the past mind is not existing because it's already finished, and the future mind is yet to be born. But the present mind will be gone in the next moment. So if present mind itself is self, when it disintegrates, your self dissolves. So this isn't a problem if we just talk about self as a convention. But if we try to talk about self as some kind of unchanging essence, then it has a problem because the mind is constantly changing. And so if we say the self is the mind, well, which mind? Is it the mind of the past, the mind of the future, or the mind of the present? But if it's the mind of the past, that's gone. And if it's the mind of the future, that's also not here now. And if the present mind is yourself, the present mind will be gone in a few seconds. So then yourself will also be gone. This again is only a problem if we try to actually identify self with a particular thing as opposed to understanding it as a mental designation. For instance, when you cut apart a plantain trunk, there's nothing there. So we might know in banana tree or plantain trees, they are just a bunch of leaves. If you look at the trunk, it's just a bunch of leaves kind of stacked on top of each other. And if you pull them apart, there's no core. It's just leaf after leaf. So like that, when with analysis you check, the self's not genuine. So when you pull the self apart, it's just it's just like that. There's not any particular core. There's just one part after another. So then, if there's no sentient being, for whom do you produce compassion then? So this is another objection. if there's no self, then what's the point of compassion? There's no sentient being, there's no object of compassion. So he says, the one you named by ignorance you allowed for sake of fruit. So the fruit here being the fruit of Buddhahood. So in order to obtain Buddhahood, one has to allow some degree of ignorance, in the sense that although there is no real self, if we think that if we just abide in the idea of no self, there will be no compassion. So we have to allow for the conventions, and the conventions have to be based on ignorance. So it's not necessarily saying that compassion is a delusion, but it's saying that compassion is based on conventionalities, and conventionalities ultimately are based in ignorance. And I think there is definitely some connection here. Some of you might know the idea that it's possible to follow the Hinayana path and achieve arhatship through the Hinayana path, or it's possible to follow the Mahayana path and then achieve full Buddhahood. And it's said that if somebody first follows the Hinayana path and achieves arhatship, then it's harder to achieve Buddhahood because they no longer have any afflictions. And so it's harder to generate compassion because you don't have a sense of a sentient being. It has to almost be contrived in order to generate that. And so in some sense, it's easier to generate compassion, still ignorance in the mind, because we still have a sense of a real being. So it's not saying that we shouldn't get rid of the ignorance, but it's that in some sense, one uses that ignorance as a way to enhance compassion. So likewise, there's no other sentient being for whom to generate compassion. There's also no person achieving Buddhahood without a being whose fruit is it. That's true, granted by ignorance. So again, based on an ignorant perception or conception, we can grant the conventionally there's the Buddhahood we need to achieve. To pacify all suffering, don't stop this ignorance toward the fruit. So in order to be free of all suffering, because we could say, well, there's no Buddhahood and there's no sentient being, but the fact is we're probably suffering right now. If we want to just deny that, then we don't make any progress. So we have to acknowledge that we are suffering, and therefore to use this framework of understanding where there are sentient beings in Buddhahood is useful in order to be free of that suffering, even though ultimately it's not true. The pride that causes suffering expands by ignorance of self. There's no way to escape from that. So it might be, although I have the quam here in the third line, it could make sense to put the quam in say the first three lines are all the quam, but the person is saying that, well, why would you want to allow for ignorance of self if it just increases the suffering that comes from pride, which comes from that ignorance? But I think that in the commentary, it's at least by Gyaltsab, he's having this first line not be the opponent. This is still Shantideva talking. So he's just saying in general that the ignorance of self is a delusion and causes suffering. And the qualm is that there's no way to escape from that suffering. But then he says to cultivate non-self is best. So actually, there is a way to be free of suffering, and that's to meditate on non-self. So now we finished the section on self as the person. So now we move on. Oh, we've lost power here. We move on to the selflessness of phenomena. Oh, actually, I made an error here in the typing. It should say selflessness of phenomena, not selflessness of persons. So this is a new section. So this is then divided into 4 parts here. First of all, the 4 close placements of mindfulness, some of you might know. This is a common practice with also in the Pali Canon. There's a close placements of mindfulness on body, feeling, mind, and phenomena. So the difference here is that in the Mahayana understanding, rather than in the Hinayana understanding, close placements of mindfulness is a meditation on the Four Noble Truths. The close placement of mindfulness on body is a way of understanding the body to be in the nature of suffering. And then on feeling is a way to understand that feelings are conditioned by craving, and therefore to understand the truth of origination. And then our mind is to understand that mind is constantly changing, and therefore cessation is possible because it's possible to change in the present state. And then close placement of mindfulness on phenomena is to understand the truth of the past, because then it can discriminate which phenomena are things to cultivate and which are things to abandon. But in the Mahayana meditation of the close placement of mindfulness, it's a meditation on emptiness. So it meditates on the emptiness of the body, feeling, mind, and phenomena. So it's going through these one by one here. So first with the body, it's to understand that the body is not findable. So likewise, before we had the self is not findable. Here, likewise, the body itself is not findable within its parts. The body is not the feet or calves. The thighs and hips aren't body too. The belly and the back aren't it, nor are the chest or shoulders it. The ribs and hands aren't body, nor are armpits or the shoulders it. Actually, I had shoulders twice. I wonder. I'll have to look again, because there's two different words in Tibetan that both mean shoulder, but maybe there's a better way to, I think actually the shoulder here that's being talked about, trakpa, it might actually mean the clavicle, this area behind the neck, as opposed to the sides of the shoulders. But in any case, these are all parts of the body. The cavities aren't it, nor are the head or throat the body. So indeed, what is the body then? Or if the body is spread about, inviting some in all of these. So if you say that, well, none of the particular parts of the body exists in all of them, then parts exist in all the parts. Because you see, the body is a collection of parts, right? You can't say that there's a body without hands and feet. I mean, you have some person who's paraplegic, but in any case, you know, that a person who has a normal functioning body with all of the parts complete, their body has those parts. So if you say that, you know, my body is in my hand, then it would have to say that all the parts of my body are in my hand, because my body is something that has all of these different parts. So then in my hand, it has hands and feet and a liver and kidney and all of these parts. So where do they exist in fact? If all the body did abide within the hands and other parts, as many parts as there exist, that many bodies would be too. So if I said the body exists in each part, then as many parts as there are, there's just that many bodies. There's my body that's in my hand, my body that's in my feet, and so forth. If in and out, no body's there, how is the body in the hands? So in and out, actually, in this context, it's related also to, there's a phrase in Buddhist philosophy, the inner person and the outer person, which is actually a way of referring to the inner person is a phrase that refers to the kind of person that's imputed by non-Buddhists. So a permanent singular and independent person, whereas the outer person is the person that gets designated on the basis of the aggregates. But in either case, there is no body in either of those. Neither of those things can be found to have a body. But also we could take this simply as inner and outer, in the sense that in the inner parts of the body or the outer parts of the body, there's no body. So how is the body in the hands? And if apart from hands, there's none, in what way does the body exist? So if you say that the body is separate from the hands, different from the feet, different from the liver and kidney and heart and all the organs, shoulders and head, then where is the body? How does it exist? No body's in the hands, and yet this ignorance conceives one there. Like how, based on a similar shape, the mind will call a scarecrow a man. So there's something that appears to be a body, or has it's like an optical illusion. It gives us the sense that there's something real there, and so therefore we impute body on the basis of that. As long as the conditions are right, that form will still appear as a man. As long as hands and such remain, to be a body, they will seem. So it's just saying that just as long as we have a body, we'll have a sense that there's a man or a person, a sentient being. And likewise, as long as there are parts of the body, we'll have the sense that there's a body that exists. that's something different from the parts. Like that of finger gathering, what in reality is a hand. So likewise, we can take apart each of the parts. The hand, when we talk about my hand, it's just a collection of fingers and the palm, joints and so forth. None of those is a hand. And then the finger too. Those two are just collections of joints. And even joints can be split up. So each individual part can, in the same way, this reasoning can be applied to each part. The parts, when split, are particles. The particles are broken up in smaller ones. When there's no parts, like sky, no particles are found. So simply that it goes on, and this is certainly the case in Madhyamaka philosophy. There's no partless particles because there's a logical fallacy that would come with that. So as far as we can go, there's always going to be more and more parts. So this has certainly some overlap with modern science, the idea that really when we come down to an atom and try to break that up, you can't ever get to a part where there's just some kind of solid thing that's unbreakable and partless. And of course, it's known now, as His Holiness often says, with quantum mechanics, bringing that part in, that really you can't even pinpoint a particle. It ends up in space and time. When we talk about momentum and location, all of these things are relative and can't be just pinpointed in a particular way. So this can certainly enhance meditation. So it's just a way, if we can, the more we understand this, it definitely can help to do these kinds of meditations about the parts of the body. But certainly it seems it's not enough just to have an intellectual understanding of it, because most people these days, at least at some level, understand about particles. Doesn't seem to necessarily diminish attachment. But if we actually think about it and use it as a meditation, it can certainly help. We can see that all the things that we conceive of as real, quite obviously, are not so. So, what reasoned person would attach to a body like a dream? Again, although we all know that the body is like a dream, that it's just imputed on a collection of parts that are be broken into smaller parts, still we attach to it. And in that way, no body's there. What man is there? What woman's there? So now we move on to close placement of mindfulness on feelings. So now we're going to examine feelings and see if they exist inherently. So if suffering is truly real, why can't it harm the joyful ones? So this is actually saying suffering. If we say that the object of our suffering, so what is suffering? This is actually quite a difficult question. Is suffering, so if I talk about an unpleasant sensation, if I cut myself on a thorn, is the thorn suffering, or is the suffering the mind experiencing it, or is it something in between? Because I say I'm experiencing suffering. I don't say my mind is suffering. I experience suffering as something different. It's experienced as we say object and object possessor. The mind and the object are two different things. But if it's a truly real thing, then why don't joyful ones? It's like, so if I cut my hand on a thorn, my mental state makes a big difference in terms of how much suffering I experience. So if there's some true thing about that being pain, a painful sensation, why does it have different degrees of pain based on the person who's experiencing it? And if pleasure is, why don't find taste bring joy to wretched anguished ones? So likewise, if we say that gourmet food is just pure bliss, why is it that when we're depressed, it doesn't bring us bliss? So we have to examine where is the feeling. Is it in the food? Is it in the thorn? If it's not in there, is it something different from the mind? And if it's just the mind itself, then what does it mean to say I'm experiencing the pain? And we can examine, like you see this woman here, she seems to be quite averse to this experience she's having. But if it's simply the mind, why can't she just immediately change that? Where is it coming from? So this is something very useful to do when we experience pain, is to focus on it and try to examine where is it coming from. And first of all, try to pinpoint it. And this is what's often done with modern mindfulness meditation. It's a good exercise to try to actually examine where the pain is. Can you pinpoint where you're experiencing it? And then try to see, what is that? What is it? Is it different from the body? Is it something in the body? Is it the mind? So these are all ways of just applying these meditations. He's going to go through this, quite a few steps, and all of these, as we can see, I think this mindfulness of feeling is one of the strongest meditations here, and also for looking at emptiness, in the sense that we can see that when we impute this idea of feeling, where can it be found? So the objection is, because it's forcefully oppressed, they don't experience that joy. So they would say that, well, actually, yes, the sensation of eating gourmet food, that is joy, but a person is extremely depressed, then that suffering overpowers the joy. So the joy is there, but they don't experience it. But then the response is, whose nature is not experienced, how could that feeling be a thing? So feeling by nature is experience. This is actually the definition of feeling in Buddhist philosophy. So how can I say that feeling is there if I don't experience it? It doesn't make any sense. It is no longer fulfills the definition of feeling if it's not something I actually experience, and there's nobody experiencing it. The suffering is subtle. The suffering is subtle, but its coarseness is dispelled by joy. It's merely joy apart from that. So it seems to be, this is actually rather confusing. I was looking quite a bit at the commentary on this verse. It's quite hard, but it seems to be that he's saying that suffering is like a very mild joy. So the joy is just a stronger joy. So the suffering, when the joy is there, then it gets rid of the coarse sensation of the suffering, because there's a stronger suffering. But it's a merely joy, or like a very subtle joy apart from that. But then the response is, well, then that subtle is also that. So that subtle thing is also joy. It's no longer suffering. It's simply joy. So you're accepting that all feelings are joy. That seems to be, as I said, what it's saying, but it's not entirely clear. So there could be a better explanation for it. If by obstructing circumstance the suffering does not arise. So if you say that obstructing circumstance or obstructing conditions, so there's some kind of outer circumstance that obstructs suffering from arising, then haven't we established that this feeling's mentally contrived? So therefore, this feeling is something that's based on conditions. It's not something that's real. If you say that, because it's arguing against the idea that suffering and pain, or suffering and joy, are two real things that exist, that we just contact one or the other. But if they are contingent upon conditions, then they're no longer real things. There's no longer a real suffering. It's simply something that is dependent on a particular configuration of conditions. So cultivate the antidote, discriminating acumen. Therefore, cultivate the antidote to suffering, which is discriminating acumen or discriminating intelligence, to look very closely at things. So the word in Tibetan, namchu, it's like to be able to discriminate this or that, to say very clearly where is the pain, where is the pleasure, without getting caught in generalities. Oh, I'm in pain. Well, then analyze very, very closely. If I say I'm in pain, well, actually, there's many different sensations going on at that time. It's a very general, coarse experience to say that. So cultivate that as the antidote to the pain. The concentration flowing from analysis is yogi's food. So he's just saying this is what sustains meditators, is the use of analysis in meditative concentration. Between the organs and what sense, if there's a gap, how could they meet? So now here he's analyzing these experience of objects. So this is a major point in Indian philosophy about how does sense consciousness, or the sense powers, how do they function? So there's different ideas. Some Indian philosophies actually believe that when I see something, there's some contact between the eye sense and the object. So actually, the eye is almost like it's sending out. This is why you might know that in Tibetan the word wangpo is the word for a sense power. Power is translated as wangpo. But actually, the word wangpo is a translation of Indra, the god Indra. So there were some ideas in Indian philosophy that there were actually little gods in the eyes, and these would go out to the object and contact it, and therefore there would be an experience of it. So this became the general term for a sense power in India, actually Indraya, I believe but it's the same in Tibetan, wangpo. But in Buddhist philosophy, the idea is that it's inward. So therefore, the object itself casts its aspect. This is a little bit closer to the modern scientific idea of light, that there's an external thing that's then casting an aspect that then meets the eye. But in any case, there has to be some contact between the two things in order for there to be a sense consciousness generated. But he's saying if there's a gap between them, how could they meet? Right? They have to, if there's two things to meet. So this is now coming to the point of what does it mean for something to meet? This is another popular argument in Madhyamaka philosophy, that to really say that two things meet is problematic. Because if they meet, then they collapse into each other. If they don't occupy the same space, then they aren't really touching each other. Or if you say that, well, they're occupying immediately adjacent space, but then the problem is, well, what part of them is meeting, right? So if you say that something, the east part of one object is meeting the west part of the other object, well, that east part also has parts, and you keep breaking that down and down, and which part is meeting which part. So ultimately, it's a similar problem with partless particles. That if few things really met in the sense of like Newtonian physics, that there's billiard balls meeting, this has to rely on partless particles, ultimate particles that are touching each other. So in that context, if you then believe that, because the idea here is that people might not have that concept, but if we analyze the way that we innately grasp it at things meeting, it would, if it was truly established, it would have to be based on these partless particles. So if there's a gap, how can they meet? Is saying, two things that don't touch each other, they don't meet each other. But if they meet, then they become one. So without one, they're identical. So without one meaning without a gap. Without one, they're identical. So what is it that meets with what? If there's no gap between them, then they're existing in the same space. One atom can't absorb its mate, so they're solid and of equal size. So if you really say that meeting involves some kind of absorption, that one thing collapses into the other, that doesn't work if two things are of solid and at equal size. Which collapses into which? What doesn't melt cannot be mixed. So if one does not collapse into the other, they can't occupy the same space. What doesn't mix can never meet. So if two things can't occupy the same space, then they can't really meet. How could it be correct to say that partless things can meet as well? So if you then say, well, things are partless, so therefore there's no problem of collapsing into each other because they have no parts. They're purely partless particles, and therefore there's no east and west side that meets. But if you have seen a partless thing meet with another, show us, please. Can you please demonstrate what would it mean for two partless things to meet with each other? Where, if there's no parts, then what meets with what? For non-material mind to meet another thing, impossible. So likewise, the idea of meeting, of contact, is dependent upon physicality. A non-material mind, what would it even mean for mind to meet something? Or collections. We might say that a collection of parts meets another collection, nor can collections, since they're false, as we've already analyzed. This was in verse 85, which was just showing that, so I'll just go back there very quickly. So like the finger gathering in the hand, right? It just keeps getting split up more and more. So there's no real collection. It's just a collection. It's just parts that we then, on the basis of many of them, designate a collection. So if there's no parts in the first place, as we've just been analyzing, we also can't have a collection that's meeting. And since there is no contact, how is feeling born from anything? So again, if you might remember the 12 links of dependent origination, contact comes from, feeling comes from contact, the sixth link. So what Shantideva has been analyzing here is to try to show how feeling is baseless, and that the argument has been by using contact, the basis for feeling. So showing that contact can't really exist in an inherent way, so that there is no such thing as feeling. So we can think about this when we think about feelings, when we try to analyze what is it. Like I'm very afraid of some particular thing. Is it going to contact my mind and therefore harm me? Or is it going to contact my body? What does that mean? And then if it contacts my body, does that then the body then contact the mind? It doesn't necessarily, if we have an immediate experience of pain, simply thinking about that might not take the pain away, but it's something that we can use to meditate on emptiness, and over long cultivation with that, gradually that can change. We've talked about advanced meditators, when they experience pain, it's experienced in a very different way. What is pain? What does it mean? What does it mean that this particular sensation is unpleasant? What makes this unpleasant versus another feeling pleasant? So this, through meditating about contact and the way that feeling, how it contacts things, or whether it contacts things, is something that over time. So the Buddha gave an example. You might know this. This is also in the Pali Canon, of saying that imagine that somebody throws a dart into your shoulder, and this would really hurt. But then imagine they throw a second dart and the same wound. That would hurt a lot more than the first dart. So he said that likewise, when you experience pain, it's painful. But then when you start having all kinds of worry and agitation about it, that makes it much, orders of magnitude more painful, like throwing a second dart into the wound. If we simply experience it without having any aversion to it, it's much different experience. And at first it's less pain, and ultimately can actually no longer be experienced as pain in that way. So what purpose to exhaust yourself? What is it harming something else? So why have all this worry and fret about avoiding suffering? When there is nobody left to feel, there also is no feeling found. So this is appealing back to our point about the lack of self. There's no inherent self, so there's nobody feeling. So what is feeling? Who is it? Me? Who is the me that's experiencing feeling? So once you've seen the truth of this, why wouldn't craving disappear? So this verse ties back to a much earlier point. If you remember when it was talking about the Mahayana, and there was this question of how do we get rid of craving? He was saying that there is both gross or coarse craving and subtle craving. And that the coarse craving, you could meditate on the Four Noble Truths without meditating in emptiness, the coarse Four Noble Truths. And you can get rid of the coarse craving, but you can't get rid of the subtle craving. So here he's talking about how to get rid of subtle craving, which is by meditation on emptiness. Once we no longer experience a sense of inherent things, then there's no longer any craving, because there's nothing to crave after, and there's nobody who's craving. What's seen and touched, it could be. What's seen and touched is also like a dream or an illusion. So because it's born along with mind, the mind cannot see feeling. But so that but of course it's going on to the next stanza, so I'll get to that in a minute. But here it's saying that this point earlier about mind not seeing mind. So likewise, how can mind see feeling? So feeling is born along with mind. It's one nature with the mind. According to Buddhist philosophy, at least, feeling is a concomitant mental factor. So it's one nature with the mind. So as the mind can't see itself, how can it see feeling? So likewise, just as external things that we see and touch are like dreams or illusions, likewise with feeling, it's not something that we can, this idea that I'm experiencing feeling, it's a designation, but it's not something we can pinpoint or find. Then he says, but from past and later feelings, they were called not by experience. So this comes back to the point of somebody saying, if there's no self-cognizer, because he just posited there's no self-cognizer, there's no such thing as mind experiencing its own feeling. But then somebody argues, well, then how do I remember having a feeling? So this is the Madhyamaka understanding of how memory functions without self-cognizers. From past and later feelings, they were called not by experience. So what happens essentially is that today I experience pain. I experience an unpleasant feeling when something bad happens to me. Then tomorrow I remember, in the sense that that same experience comes to mind again, and I again experience unpleasantness. So thereby, my mind then creates a link between the past and future in saying that I experienced both of those, and therefore I remember experiencing this before. When really it's just that there's two different experiences arising in the space of consciousness. There's no mind, there's no me that was experiencing both of them. It's my mind creating it, and therefore talking about it as though I'm now remembering what happened yesterday, when really it's the same, the same continuum of experience arising, and my mind then imputes self and past and future and present, and gives the sense that there is me now remembering what happened yesterday. It has to do with a particular paradigm or framework of understanding. It's not because there is literally an experience of the mind, it's directly that then encodes that and then later is accessed and remembered. So, and again, it's saying, why can't self-cognition function? Because it can't experience itself, another can't experience it. So here is one of the problems with how can mind experience itself. It can't be, as we said, that mind can just directly experience itself, because the experiencer and the experience have to be two different things. Like a mirror can't reflect itself. But another can experience it is saying that if there is a second mind experiencing the first mind, then there are all kinds of other problems, especially that then there has to be a third mind experiencing the second mind, and so on. It becomes infinite regress. So experience in that regard is not verifiable. We can't ever say that this is the real experience, and we can verify it based upon some solid thing. So there is really mind, because there is a solid self-cognition experiencing it. There's nobody who feels at all, and therefore feeling isn't real. So how could it bring harm to this assemblage that lacks a self? So again, it's just summarizing this point, this whole section of meditation of close placement of mindfulness on feeling. There's no person who feels, so therefore there is no feeling. This idea that there is me and there's the feeling, that is a mental construction. That is actually what causes the suffering, what makes it into suffering, rather than simply experience without any reference point to a person. So if, again, we can see with this person, he looks very averse to the feeling he's experiencing. You might want to just say to him, relax. It's based on your aversion to it that's making it so uncomfortable for you. So then we come to the close placement of mindfulness on mind, the third stage. So what is mind? Where is mind? Within the organs, organs, there is no mind. Within the sense organs, or the five sense organs in the brain, we could say is the empowering organ for mental consciousness. But none of those contains the mind. How can you say the mind is in those? Where is mind? Where when I experience something, where is my mind? It's popular these days to say, well, it's in my head, but what does that even mean? Where is mind something that has physicality or locality? This experience of something. What would it even mean to say it's in a particular place? It's not in form or in between. So it's not in any of the particular parts of the body, and it's not in between any of them. Not outside and not within. And this again is actually, Gyaltsab reads this to be related, I mentioned earlier. The outer person, being the Buddhist conception of a person, or the inner person being the one that's posited by non-Buddhists. It's not really, I haven't seen a clear explanation of why they're called that, but it seems to be that inner person, it said Nangi Chepeke would mean like inwardly created person, which seems to be it's created by wrong conceptions. So somebody creates an idea, it's like a figment of your imagination. So there's no, and versus the outside person, which is the conventionally existent person that Buddhists accept, which is something that we can actually experience, but nevertheless, mind is not contained in that, and not found in another place. We don't go somewhere different from our aggregates and say that apart from my body and my mind is my mind. That wouldn't make any sense. What's neither form nor something else, nor mixed nor found apart from that, is non-existence in the least. So it doesn't exist at all. And this is, of course, saying true existence. Conventionally, mind exists, and we can talk about it, we can make statements about it, but it's not something findable. So beings are natural nirvana is actually, natural nirvana is a synonym for emptiness. Emptiness is natural nirvana because it is the object we meditate on in order to achieve nirvana. So beings are natural nirvana is saying that, beings are empty of inherent nature, but it's also a way of saying that when we recognize this, we can see the potential for nirvana. As I mentioned earlier, that meditation on close placement of mindfulness on the mind is a way of understanding the possibility of cessation. This mind is not a fixed thing. It's constantly changing. And so there is a possibility for transformation. So now it's coming to another argument about, if you posit mind as a real thing, and then there's objects of mind, how do they relate to each other? Are they cause and effect? Well, which causes which? So if mind exists before what's known, observing what does it arise? So if I said that the mind exists first and then what's known is later, well, how does it arise based on knowing something? Because mind is something that by its nature is knowing something else. But if that thing doesn't exist yet, how can the mind knowing it exist? Or if they're simultaneous, observing what does it arise? So then the same problem, for something to be cause and effect, the cause has to precede the effect. So if mind is the effect of what it observes, but they exist at the same time, then what did it observe to arise? Because there had to be something the previous moment that caused mind to arise in the present moment. But if it's after what it knows, at that time, where does mind come from? So this is just saying, if you talk about inherent existence, if first there's the object, and then the second, and then later there's the mind, but at that time, the object is already gone. So then there's no more mind. There's no more cause for the mind. Now, conventionally, we do say that mind comes after the object. But if they existed inherently, it's understood that therefore they would have to meet. This comes back to the problem of meeting. That the action of generating the mind would have to be, if it inherently existed, then it would have to be actually a quality of mind. So we could use an easier example, the sprout and the seed. This is what's usually used to start. So the action of generating the sprout exists at the time of the seed. But if the sprout was a truly existent thing, then the action of generating it would actually have to exist with it. It's merely a designation to say that the action of generating the sprout exists at the time of the seed, because there is no sprout then. What does it mean to be generating a sprout when there's no sprout? So it shows that the action of generating the sprout and the cause and effect are merely mental designations. If it was truly existent, then you'd say, well, when the sprout is being generated, the sprout should be there, because you're talking about some kind of action that's related to the sprout, but there is no sprout then. But this is how we talk in ordinary language. And we say, I'm baking a cake, but there's no cake there. The cake is going to be there when I finish baking it. So it shows that our ordinary language is based on designation. It's not based on something real. If I was really baking a cake, then there should be a cake that I'm then manipulating in some way. But we talk in that way, and we're constantly creating things that aren't there as a helpful way of drawing connections between things, even though but then we make the mistake of thinking that they're actually real. So likewise here, the same reasoning can apply to mind. To think that mind comes from what generated it would have to be that the generation of mind is going on before mind exists. But at that time, there's no mind to be generating. So then we have the final one. We had the close placements of mindfulness on body, feeling, mind, and finally phenomena. So this is very brief here. It's just saying apply that same reasoning to everything else. In that way, all phenomena can never be known to be born. So that we can never talk about the production of anything in an inherent way. So now dispelling disputes. He's now dispelling objections to his presentation of emptiness. The objection is, in just that way conventions too do not exist. There's no true truth. So you're saying that nothing is findable. So this is the objection that if nothing is findable, things can't even exist conventionally, because for something to exist, you have to be able to pinpoint what it is, or actually say this is that thing. Otherwise, if we can't agree on anything, then anything you could say just exists, and there's no real way to talk about what's conventionally right and wrong. So there's no true truth. There's no ultimate truth. There's no conventional truth. There's only things that others impute. So it's saying what all exists is just a figment of imagination. So whatever I say is true for me, and whatever you say is true for you, but there's no real anything happening anywhere. So how do beings attain nirvana? So now you've destroyed the path. This is very similar to some of you might know in Nagarjuna's in his Root Wisdom in chapter 24, when he says the very first verse of chapter 24, which is chapter 24 is similar to dispelling disputes to the previous chapters. Gele dekun so if everything is empty, then there's no arising and no cessation. But the Four Noble Truths also become meaningless for you. So it's saying that you've destroyed the path. You've destroyed any basis for spiritual practice, because there's no such thing as anything existing. So this is the objection to the philosophy of emptiness, saying it then undermines the basis for practicing the Four Noble Truths. So the response is, what you call others' thought ideas are not conventions we accept. So this idea, your idea is that you're saying I say conventions are just mere thought ideas, mere figments of imagination, but that's not what I call a convention. So that you misinterpreted what I was saying. What's ascertained conventionally exists. What isn't doesn't at all. So it's saying conventions also have to be based on valid cognition conventionally. So when I can look at things, I can say that this is what's there and that's not. I can ascertain conventionally that there is a table and a lamp in front of me. It's wrong to say that there is not. It's wrong to say that there is a wall directly in front of me, because there's not a wall, there's a table. So it's ascertained conventionally. When I analyze it ultimately, I can't philosophically define what it is, but conventionally it exists. What's thought of in the thinking mind are mutually dependent things. And like all systems positing things, are based upon the world's renown. So you might remember very early in the chapter, he talked about how everything is posited by renown. So what's thought of in the thinking mind, right? That all of these things exist by mutual designation. So this is again a unique idea of the Prasangika, that things actually have to exist independent upon what they're designated on the basis of. So mind that only exists in a relation to what's known, and what's known only exists in a relation to mind. So therefore, it doesn't make any sense to talk about mind without an object. And likewise, it doesn't make any sense to talk about an existing thing without a mind knowing it. So this also negates the idea of a self-cognizer, because it would say that there is experience of mind that's separate from experience of object. They're experienced in one, there's one experience that at the same time is experiencing a mind and what's known. So it's based upon the world's renown to then split them up and talk about them as separate things. And it's based upon the world's renown to talk about anything as existing as a separate thing. A classic example is the far mountain and the near mountain. It's only the near mountain in relation to the far mountain. Here and there, it's only based on what's, a relation to something else. So it's all based upon worldly conventions. The objection then is, what analyzes something else must too in turn be analyzed. So if you say that there's a mind that analyzes things and realizes emptiness, well, that mind also must be analyzed. And therefore, there has to be some other mind realizing that is empty. And so what analyzes that must also be a never end. So then there's infinite regression. There's never anything that can verify anything, because everything can be established as empty by the mind analyzing it. So the response is, if objects have been analyzed, the analyzer lacks a base. So actually, in some sense, he's agreeing with the opponent. Yes, the mind realizing emptiness also doesn't exist inherently. It doesn't have to be. To verify something doesn't require an objective verification. It lacks a base. There's no basis that's truly existent. Without a base, it isn't born. We titled that nirvana too. So therefore, again, it's this natural nirvana, that it's empty. So that things naturally are empty of inherent existence. When we understand that, we can be free of clinging to them, and that will lead to nirvana. For those for whom these two are true, their standpoint's very difficult. So when they try to say that the mind and the objects are true, that there is a real thing that's called an object that exists distinct from mind experiencing it, and there is a real thing that's mind that exists separate, distinct from what it experiences, then that's a very difficult standpoint to defend. Because if minds are used to prove what's known, what base is there supporting mind? So if you say, well, I can prove to you that there is an external world, a real world, because I know it with my mind. Well, then you have to prove that that your mind is correct. How do you know that your mind is experiencing something real? So this if any of you were there for the course I did on the Dispelling Disputes by Nagarjuna, he went into this in quite a lot of detail. And I thought a very good example that was actually given by one of the Western philosophers who was commenting on Nagarjuna was that if I imagine I'm trying to identify something at a distance and I can't quite make it out, I'm trying to identify a particular person, you could say, and I think it's this particular person, but I'm not sure. So in order to verify that, I actually go to get my eyes checked because I want to see, is my eyesight deceiving me? So I go to the doctor. So this is a form of verification. I have to then have the doctor verify that I'm seeing properly. And I could say, okay, therefore that's objective. That's verification. So I go to the doctor, and the doctor says, yes, your eyesight's fine. But then I realize, well, wait a minute. How do I know the doctor is a proper doctor? You know, I have to check his credentials and make sure he knows what he's talking about. So then that has to be verified by something else. So then I go to look at his diploma, which is on the wall. Where did he go to school and study? So I look at that diploma, but it's really blurry because I am not sure if I can read it properly. So then I have to verify that and go to another eye doctor to verify that my eyesight is correct. So this never ends. There's just constant. If everything has to be verified, you can never really verify anything. So it's saying that conventional reality is based on convention. It's not something that can ultimately be verified. So I cannot ultimately say this world exists. We cannot ultimately verify it because we can't verify the thing that's verifying it. And then it just has to be an endless base. So that in that sense, nothing can be said to truly exist. True existence has to be based on true verification. So, or if instead what's known proves mind, so the other option is that you can say that the mind, the fact that I know things proves that they exist, but the opposite could be true, that the fact that things are known proves that I have a mind. What base supports the things that's known? It's the same problem. How can I say that things exist and therefore I'm correct because my mind experiences them? How could I know that they exist if there's no mind experiencing them? So I can't ultimately verify that I have a mind either, or that my experience is accurate without recourse to mind itself. So existing by each other's force, the two of them do not exist. So mind and objects of mind do not ultimately exist. They only exist independent upon each other, in relation to each other. So and then he gives an example. If there's no father with no son, then where is it that sons come from? There is no father with no son, and so the two do not exist. So remember earlier I was saying yesterday, what does it mean to be a father without a son? It's a ridiculous statement. There's no such thing as a father who has no son, or you could say daughter, but in the sense of having a child. A person is not a father if he doesn't have a child. But then where is it the sons come from? You say sons come from their father and their mother. But before the son is born, they're not a father or a mother. But the cause has to precede the effect. So there was no mother at the time of the cause. So there's no mother giving birth. So there is therefore neither of them exist. There is no father and the son, and so the two do not exist. They only exist in relation to each other. And then an objection, a sprout arises from a seed and still can verify that seed. So this is saying that a sprout is the result of a seed. But it can verify the seed in that it can be used as a reason to prove that there's a seed. So I can say, well, I know that although I can't see the seed in the ground, I know that there was a seed there before because I see the sprout now. Just like saying I know that there is fire because I can see the smoke. So likewise, why can't mind arising from the thing it knows confirm that thing? So why can't I therefore prove that there is a thing because there's now a mind experiencing it? Because the mind experiencing it can only have come from that thing existing. If I'm seeing, if I'm seeing a lamp right now, then that my eye consciousness experiencing the lamp can only have arisen if there was a lamp there. So I can prove that there was a thing there that I'm seeing. The response is, if mind that's different from a sprout can realize that a seed exists, from what source do you realize that mind can realize that it knows what it knows? So again, to to say that a sprout proves a seed, it requires a mind that cognizes that. And therefore, that mind has to be, we say, substantially different thing from the sprout itself. But then in order to prove that mind, so I'm going to look at the commentary again here. This is also quite difficult. Yeah, it's the same point, just that if you say that he's actually attacking the person for their example, that a sprout can prove the existence of a seed, because he's saying that in order to establish the existence of a seed, you have to have a mind that establishes that. And then it has to be established by something else. And we've already proven that there can't be something else, a self-cognizer experience in the mind. I mean, even if there was, there's the same problem of infinite regress. So a sprout doesn't really prove a seed at all. Conventionally it does, but it doesn't truly establish a seed. To truly establish it, there would have to be some kind of ultimate verification, but the mind can't be that, because then you have to verify the mind based upon another mind, proving that that first mind was correct. So now we've finished, in terms of the analysis of selflessness of phenomena, we had the four close placements of mindfulness. So now he's going to go through some of the classic reasoning, or we say syllogisms that establish selflessness. So the first one is diamond shards. This is the syllogism saying the subject, a sprout, it does not exist. It does not is not truly existently born, because it doesn't come from causes that are the same as it. It's not born from itself or from other, nor from neither, nor from both. This is Nagarjuna's reasoning in the first line of his root wisdom. You can still hear me, right? It's really pouring rain here, and the light's gone out. I don't know if you can see and hear me. So in order to do this, then one has to reject those four possibilities. If something was truly existently born, it would have to be born from one of those four possibilities. So then he goes through negating them one by one. First of all, things can't come from no cause. So the Charvaka, we say the materialist school, which claims that there is no cause. Things can come about randomly. In this sense, it's similar to materialism, that things just happen with no particular reason. So nobody sees a creator that designs a peacock's feathers, nor somebody fashioning the delicate petals of a lotus or the sharp edge of a thorn. Therefore, nobody made them, and they are simply naturally existent. So in modern science, there's the understanding, okay, well, the peacock's feathers, these arose from evolution. So there, in some sense, there's a cause. But at a deeper level, why do the particular laws of physics and the laws of the universe function in the way that they do? That is actually a question for science. It's not something that's been resolved, although some people just kind of assume, well, that's just the way it is. It's just natural that, for example, the speed of light is 186,000 miles per second. But why is it that speed and not something else? Why do things have particular properties that they have? These are the laws of the universe. So then people would say, well, they're just naturally existent. Well, that's actually an assumption. And that is basically saying that it's lack of cause. And there are definitely scientists who object to that. They say that the laws have to be there from something. So some people would say that God made the laws. Others would say that the laws are there before the universe existed. But then the question is, where were they substantiated? Where do they exist before the universe existed? But this is a question that I think, again, is something that these traditional arguments actually have something to contribute to. So I won't get into it more, But if you're interested, this is something that you can research, and it's not just something that is taken for granted as, oh, we already understand it, it's just natural. There's a question of why do things function in these particular laws. So the Charvaka is saying that it's just the way it is. It just happens because it's just there. Nobody made them. It's just simply naturally existent. But then the response is, all people can directly see that for the causes that give rise to things. So we see in the world that everything functions by cause and effect. So it's inconsistent if there are certain things that are just causeless. Everything should come from some particular cause. The stems of lotuses and such arise from many causes can arise. So it's not one thing. It's not like one creator God made the lotus, but there is a confluence of many different causes and conditions that give rise to that. But then the objection is these causes, who created them? The response, the various causes from before. So nobody created them, but they just go back to previous causes. It wasn't that somebody at one point fashioned them. But then the objection is, what power is caused to give results? The power of a previous cause. So who said that causes have the power to give results? Well, their power to give results comes about from the previous cause. It's just and going back and back and back. So in that context, if there's particular ways that the universe functions, those have to have arisen from a cause in the past. There has to be some way to posit a cause for that. And so it can't just be said to be, well, just the way it is. It just arose causelessly when at the time of the Big Bang. There has to have been something before that conditioned it to arise in that particular way. So then the possibility is a permanent cause. So that God made it this way. So the Shaivites who are accepting that Ishvara created the universe. So Ishvara is the cause of beings. Well, tell us who Ishvara is. Okay, that just pushes the question a little bit farther back. You say Ishvara created all of this. Well, who is he and where did he come from? So then if you say the elements are him, that's one response people have. That that when we say God, we're talking about the elements, earth, water, fire, wind, all of the different functions of the universe. Well, okay, why harp upon a single name? So then you said, okay, the elements, we agree that the elements created everything, but you call them Ishvara or you call them the elements. What difference does it make? How does your God have any real functionality at all? Usually when people talk about God, they talk about something supernatural, something beyond just the ordinary elements. But then likewise, in any case, they're multiple, impermanent, they move and aren't a God. They're stepped on and impure. The elements are not Ishvara. So there's 6 reasons he gives why they can't, if you say the elements are Ishvara, well, Ishvara is a single thing, and the elements are many, they're multiple. The elements are impermanent, and you say Ishvara is permanent. The elements move, and you say Ishvara is moving. They aren't a God, they're just earth and water. They're stepped on. So this is saying that people walk on the earth, but you can consider Ishvara to be this holy being who we should pay homage to. So it's actually offensive to say that Ishvara is the elements because they're just treated without any respect and they're impure. You say that Ishvara is pure, but how does that make any sense if the elements, all the disgusting things in the world are elements? So then they're also Ishvara. And then also, he isn't space, it doesn't move. So you can't say Ishvara is space because space is unmoving. Of course, they do say that Ishvara is unmoving, but here he's saying that if it doesn't move, really it couldn't create anything. Not self, which we just proved before. So we've already showed that there can't be an inherent self, so Ishvara can't be the self. If he is inconceivable, how's inconceivable expressed? So if you say Ishvara is beyond any kind of language or conception, well then how do we even know that he exists or talk about him? What does it even mean? It just becomes kind of an evasion of the question. That I ask you who is Ishvara, well, he's nothing. I can't tell you because it's beyond the conception. Well, then there's no way to argue with that. You've just could have dismissed your own philosophy. So what thing do you assert he makes? So you say, who, if Ishvara makes things, who does he make? What does he make? The self. If you say that he makes the self, the Atman, the self, that element and Ishvara, aren't they permanent? So haven't you said earlier that because according to their philosophy, the elements and Ishvara and the self are all permanent. So how could it make any sense that Ishvara made the self if the self is permanent? The self should have never been made because it always existed. It's permanent. So then he comes back to the original point. So mind is born from what it knows. So it's wrong to say that mind is this permanent thing, this Atman that exists since beginningless time. It actually, we have to posit the Buddhist position. It just arises from the object. When there's an object, there's the Buddha said the three conditions. There's an object, there's a sense power, there's a previous moment of consciousness, then there'll be a moment of consciousness experiencing the object. There's no consciousness that existed permanently since beginningless time. From endless time, from karma came both joy and pain. What's left for him to make? If your cause has a start, how can results then have it? If your cause has no start, how can results then have a start? So if we say that this karmic cycle has been going on since beginningless time, then who needed to make it? It never was made in the first place. If your cause has no start, your cause being Ishvara, how can the results have a start? Because Ishvara is the creator. If he's beginningless, then there shouldn't have ever been a beginning of time because the creator was always there. And as long as there's a cause, the result should be there. Why doesn't he make all the time? So if you say, well, at the beginning, he didn't make anything. So there was some particular point in time when he started making something. Since beginningless time, each art has been there, but the cycle of causation is only started at a particular point in time. So, but why wasn't he always making things? He can't depend on something else. So it's saying that if he's permanent, he's not relying on another cause. So there shouldn't be that he just decided now to make things and before he didn't make things. What influenced him to do that? There wasn't anything, he doesn't depend on anything else. There's nothing that he doesn't make, so how could he depend on it? So if you say he created all things, everything that exists is something he made, well then that thing that convinced him to start making, isn't that also something he made? So therefore, how could he be dependent on that to make things? If he depends, a group of things must be the cause, his father is not. So again, if he depends on something else to start making things, then there's a collection of causes. It's not just this one singular cause. There's the things that caused him to cause, and then his making them. A group lacks power not to make. So likewise, if it's a collection of causes, then there's nobody deciding. There's nobody saying, now I'm going to make things. It's just a collection that when they happen to be collected, they happen to make a result. Without the group, he's powerless. So we come back to the same problem. If it's just him singularly, then he has no power to do anything. If with no wish Ishvara makes, then he depends on something else. Saying that if he just makes without wanting to make anything, then he's not really making any decisions. He's not in charge of his own decisions. Because he's, without even wanting to, he just is forced to make things. Or if he wishes, he depends upon that wish. So if he does wish to make things, then the wish is already something different from him. And therefore, he's dependent on that wish in order to make things. So how is that Ishvara? How is that what you call Ishvara to be a unitary, permanent entity? So now we've finished, I think, the section on negating the creator God. So I'll leave it here. We have 10 minutes left in this session, and then we can continue with the next verses in the next session. But if people have any questions now, we can have time for that. From verse 75, yes. Let's see. Compassion can be based on the fact that sentient beings are suffering through their ignorant belief in self. So even if that suffering does not inherently exist, it is still experienced by sentient beings. And so that thought alone is enough to generate compassion, irrespective of the ultimate validity of that suffering or the misperception of the self. Yes, basically, yeah, that's the idea here. That there's ultimately there's no suffering, but if we get too absorbed in that, we won't actually put effort into eliminating the suffering. Right? We have to actually put a lot of effort into meditation and emptiness. So you might have heard there was that saying of Lama Geshe. Somebody said to him, something about understanding emptiness, and so Lama Geshe said, "Well, if I punch you in the face, does it matter to you? Because there's no experiencing pain." So maybe it doesn't matter to you. If you're really that advanced, then probably you don't need to meditate anymore. But for most of us, it's the realization is not so deep that we can just say nothing matters to me. It does matter. So in the meantime, we need to actually put effort into meditating on emptiness more. And we also have to be careful because, as we talked about yesterday, people can meditate and think that they're free of this, and they can say, "Well, nothing really matters to me anymore. I don't really care." And not just at an intellectual level, but they might have some very strong meditative experience. And really, when they experience pleasure and pain, it doesn't affect them that much, but there's still the seed of that there. So that's why at some level, it's actually useful to allow that experience to come again. If we don't have any manifest pain or pleasure, then we won't have any impetus to continue on the path. So at some level, it's good to have that manifest in the mind as a motivating force to remember we have to keep meditating. We have to keep doing that until we fully eliminated the seeds. Can you please explain verse 100 again? Okay. So verse 100, from past and later feelings, they were recalled not by experience. Right, so this was talking about, maybe I'll do the screen share again just so you can all see it. That how do we remember things? We had past and later feelings. So the example that Chantakirti gives, which is a little easier, is about experiencing blue. If I saw blue yesterday and then I remember it today, how is it that I remember, how do I remember experiencing blue? So, and then the one possibility is that there was a self-cognizer of the mind experiencing blue. But Chantakirti says it's simply because there's a similar experience today and yesterday. So yesterday, through the force of a blue object contacting my eyes, then there was an experience of blueness. And today, through the force of the imprint of yesterday's experience, there is then an experience of blue in the mind, in the mental consciousness. Those two experiences are distinct, but they're similar. So then conceptual consciousness then connects the dots and says, I saw this yesterday, and therefore I'm remembering it now. But that's the designation. What I'm actually experiencing now is not the same as what I experienced yesterday. Yesterday was an eye consciousness, and today it's a mental consciousness. It's just like if I see the same thing in 2 days in a row, it's actually changed in the meantime. It's not really the same thing, but conventionally I can say it's the same thing. So likewise, conventionally I can say what I'm experiencing now is a memory of what I saw yesterday. But there was no me yesterday experiencing it, and there's no me experiencing it now, and the experience now is not the same as the experience yesterday. It's just similar to it. So memory can function even if there is no inherent self and there's no self-cognizer. So likewise with experience, I get really angry at somebody today and it's unpleasant. And then tomorrow I think about it again and I get angry again. And I think that I'm remembering yesterday's experience. Really, it's just a similar experience. And then I'm connecting it with yesterday's experience. there was nobody there experiencing it that is connected from yesterday to today. These are actually, the entire idea of yesterday and today and me and the object and the mind. All of those are dependent designations based on my conceptual framework of thinking about things. And therefore, then we fall into a trap of saying, well, how does memory function? The problem is that we have a particular framework, and then we try to fit memory into that. Whereas actually that framework is just a helpful way of seeing things. It's not the way things actually exist. So memory does not have to fit into that in order to be a functioning thing. I hope that makes some sense. If you're interested, I think maybe you were there anyway, but in the course I gave on the dispelling disputes, I talked quite a lot about that and about Chandrakirti and his presentation of that. But as I say, it's a difficult point. I mean, this is called what Tsongkhapa called one of the 8 difficult points of Madhyamaka. Is how does that work? So it's not an easy point. So if we remember the experience, then aren't we remembering the mind of yesterday having that experience? Well, if I remember seeing a horse yesterday, is my memory of the horse and my memory of seeing the horse 2 different things? Is there 2 different minds going on at the same time?
Well, what I was thinking is that if we remember a horse, when we say we remember a horse, it requires a mind to remember a horse. So we cannot get out of having a mind involved, even though we may want to put the focus on the object.
Right. So it's true there is mind involved, but does that mean I am remembering mind?
Well, yeah.
Yes.
I think for the Chandrakirti or Shantideva school, they want to avoid saying that. And I just don't see how they can avoid saying that, because
well, like that. Yeah, okay. Yeah. Yes, because
just as they say, there cannot be an object without the mind, or there cannot be a mind without an object. So as soon as you mention the object, you're not talking about just the object, you're talking about remembering the object. So the remembering is the mind.
Well, the mind remembering, yes. But your question was, do I remember mind? So then I'm asking, if I remember mind and I remember the horse, is the memory of mind and the memory of the horse 2 distinct minds? Are they 2 different are they 2 different consciousness functioning at the same time? Or is it one mind that remembers both of them?
I am saying that whenever we recall the memory of an object in the past, the object and the mind involved in that is recalled at the same time. They cannot be separated. Yeah, because how can you?
So in that
because mind is not a thing by itself. The mind, in the case of a mind, is like the action is the mind. The action is the agent. So when we are experiencing, feeling, so upon the feelings, upon the experiencing, we impute a mind. So whenever we are saying that I'm thinking, the thinking is the mind. It's not like a separate mind doing the thinking. That's my understanding. That's why because of why I'm thinking like this, because of myself thinking like this, the argument here doesn't make sense to me. Yeah. So
Well,
that's what.
okay, so you've agreed that therefore there is only one memory. There's not a memory of the mind and a memory of the horse that are two separate things. So that one memory, when it remembers the horse and the mind, does it remember them as two different things? Is it like remembering two things at the same time?
You have a point here. Yeah, there is the horse, and then there is the horse in the past, and so the mind experiencing the horse in the past. This all happened in the past, and then now there's a current mental consciousness recollecting that whole experience. Although I acknowledge that there is the object and the mind, but I can't see how we can say that we have a memory of a horse without also having a mind involved here, because it is the mind that remembers.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, what's being negated here is not that I'm remembering experiencing the horse. What's being negated is that in order for that to happen, there has to have been a experience of the experience at the time.
There has to be an experience of the experience
At the time.
Well, if there is experience of the horse, then the experience is there. What is there to need to say that there is a separate mind to verify the experience? So my thinking is actually somewhere in between the Madhyamaka position and the mind-only position, because when we say that when Shantideva refute that the mind, we shouldn't say that mind illuminate itself, because then it implies that mind has darkness that need illuminating. But I'm thinking that to say that the lamp self-illuminate, it is simply pointing out the nature of lamp to illuminate. So like to point out that the mind can know itself is to simply point out that that is the nature of the mind. The mind knows. So it sounds, it is just difficult for me to accept that mind knows things, but it doesn't know that it is knowing. Like experientially, you know, if I can look at a picture, I can look at you, and I can kind of like pull the attention back a little bit and know that I'm looking at you. Yeah, it's not like I look at you and I don't know that I don't know I'm looking at you. It's all seems like very.
The Madhyamaka is not saying that you're not aware that you're aware. It's saying that your awareness of being aware is an implicit understanding. It's not something that you directly experience. Yeah.
Maybe I'm saying that the mind only is positing too much, and the Madhyamaka in refuting the mind only, they are refuting too much.
Okay.
Because obviously, well, as you just said, the Shantideva probably wasn't saying that mind cannot be aware of what it is doing. So the minute we say that, then we say that mind is aware of itself.
It's aware of itself, but not directly. It does not directly see itself. It's only aware of it implicitly through its relation to something else.
Through its relation to something else? Such as?
Through its relation to what it's experiencing.
Well, then, okay. Then again, I think it comes back to the questions of then what it is that we do in the Mahamudra meditation, because Mahamudra meditation is taking object, taking mind as the object.
That's right.
So mind always has an object. So in the case of Mahamudra, it is taking mind as an object.
Yes.
It is always aware of something.
That's an ongoing question for me. I'm not entirely sure how to answer that. But my general answer, at least tentative answer, is that you're taking, in Mahamudra meditation, you're taking the objects appearing to mind, to the mental consciousness, and focusing on those.
Yeah, and the point of Mahamudra meditation is not that they want to take mind as an object per se, but that it wants to understand the nature of the mind. Because mind being so, of all the phenomena in the world, mind is so crucial. So instead of trying to understand the nature of a flower or a cloud or things like this, then we pick the most crucial phenomena to understand, and with that we open the Pandora box. That's I think my understanding is the idea. So if mind cannot directly know itself, then this whole exercise of Mahamudra meditation is pointless. We are trying to do the impossible. I'm actually asking a spiritually existential question here.
Well, it's clearly possible because all of us can, when we close our eyes, we can still experience something going on. But the question is, that's what the Mahamudra is meant to do, is to examine that. What is that experience? Right? And so
the Mahamudra meditation is going beyond that. That's the first step of Mahamudra meditation. Because the experience, initially, the different things that we are experiencing in our mind is the waves. So eventually they want to wait for the waves to come down and then see the ocean itself. Then that's the mind directly seeing the mind. And that is the part that Shantideva say is not possible.
Yeah. Well, I think we probably need to take a break here, just because
Thank you.
I have to do some things in the next hour before we start again in 50 minutes now.
Okay.
So let's break for now, and I'll see you all at 6:30.
Thank you so much, Venerable Gache. See you at 6:30. Yeah, you stay with that, or you want to do?
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. Yeah.
Yep.
6:30 is fine.
Thank you so much. Thank you. So see everybody in 50 minutes. Thank you so much. If you're in different time zones, then you might not know what time it is here. Yeah, 50 minutes. Thank you. See you soon.